The Australian economy is in absolute chaos at the moment. Every time Aussies look to the government for answers, all they see is finger pointing. Politicians blaming each other, and when that runs out, they start blaming us, Aussies. That's what we have become.
My comments yesterday, I do need to correct the record. My comments should have said the Morrison government, not the Howard government.
Order.
We're just 6 minutes or so into question time, and the disrespect in this chamber is unacceptable.
Hey guys, Scott here, and I need you to understand this because what just happened over the last week is not normal. In the space of just a few days, the RBA did something extraordinary. They came out in public and alluded to what senior economists have been quietly whispering for months. This is big. They said that the economic uncertainty we're living through and the rate pain Aussies are feeling right now is not random. It has a culprit, and the current government is being blamed for it, with the RBA effectively backing that up. That's a huge moment because just days earlier, Treasurer Jim Chalmers was out there saying everything was on track. He was downplaying the problem, saying inflation wasn't the government's issue, acting like nothing had gone wrong. He even went a step further and blamed Aussie households, saying people spend too much, lived too hard, and now they need to wear the high repayments because of it. Then the RBA walks into a public hearing and calmly, mathematically contradicts him. So what happens next? Jim Chalmers freaks out and pivots. Instead of taking responsibility, suddenly we're talking about overhauling the Australian tax system, raising taxes on everything: electricity, fuel, alcohol, and essentials. And if CGT and negative gearing get touched, you already know what comes next. Higher rents, more pressure on households, more pain laid on top of the pain. And the crazy part is, all of this has unfolded in one single week. At this point, it generally feels like a reality TV show. If there was a series on how this government is handling the Aussie economy, it would make the Kardashians look sane. And while all of this is playing out, the big four banks are watching it in real time. Just hours ago, they flipped their forecast for 2026, completely reversed course, because they're looking at this and thinking one thing: this isn't getting fixed quickly. Aussies are being locked into a longer stretch of uncertainty and rate pain. And here's the real problem. Every single one of these developments is being reported in isolation, like they're unrelated, like they're not part of the same story. No one is putting all of these pieces together. So in this video today, that's exactly what I'm going to do for you. So I'm going to put it all together. We're going to look at what the RBA actually said, what Jim Chalmers has been claiming, why taxes are suddenly everywhere, why the banks just flipped, and what all of this means for Aussie households heading into 2026, what this means for you. Because you have the right to know what's coming. You have the right to know what this means for your money, your repayments, and your future. And if you want daily updates on property and the economy, hit the subscribe button. Okay, let's get into it. So just last week, the RBA lifted interest rates by 0.25%, taking the cash rate up to 3.85%. That was the first hike in more than 2 years, and it immediately made life harder for a lot of households. The big four banks moved fast. Westpac went first, then CBA, NAB, and ANZ followed. Every one of them passed the hike straight onto mortgage holders. For an average borrower, that's roughly an extra $100 a month in repayments. What makes this worse is the timing. This year was meant to be about a bit of relief. Instead, people are already dealing with high rents, expensive groceries, energy bills are absolutely through the roof, and house prices refuse to cool. Rates going up again was the last thing anyone needed. And the RBA didn't exactly calm things down with this outlook. Inflation isn't expected to get back into the 2 to 3% target range until around mid-2027. And core inflation is expected to sit higher for even longer. That tells you this pressure isn't going away quickly. So when people say it feels like there's no breathing room, that's why. Relief keeps getting pushed further down the road. Straight after the rate hike, Treasurer Jim Chalmers fronted the media and said something that raised a lot of eyebrows. He pointed to the RBA's written statement, the one they release every time they announce a rate decision, and said, look at this, the RBA didn't even mention government spending. He really should not have said that. He said, this isn't on us, this isn't on the government. Inflation pressure is coming from private demand. And when politicians say private demand, what they really mean is you and I, Aussie households. He repeated that message again and again in interviews that day. Government spending is fine, the pressure is coming from people spending too much, and now because of that, households need to adjust to higher repayments. But the problem is the story completely falls apart the moment you look at the data. Private demand in Australia has actually been pretty weak. Households have already been pulling back, people aren't splurging, they're cutting subscriptions, delaying purchases, and just trying to get through the week. Public spending and public demand, on the other hand, exploded. Outside of the COVID years, when emergency spending actually made sense, government spending is now sitting near the highest levels it has been in decades as a share of our GDP. Treasury's own forecasts show spending heading towards around 27% of GDP in 2025 to 2026 in an economy that is already stretched. That is an enormous number. Also, ask yourself this, where is that money coming from? It's not coming from booming tax revenue or productivity growth. It's coming from borrowing. They are spending money they do not have. We are living in a budget deficit. And when you flood an economy with demand without fixing supply, prices go up. That's basic economics.
The problem in Australia, as per this chart, is that public spending, after many, many years of very, very strong growth, is running at record levels as a share of the economy. And that was okay when private demand was low. But then when private demand started to pick up, government demand was in the way. And of course, we've ended up with this pickup in inflation.
Inflation was not random, it was manufactured. Some might even say it was planned. And this is where I generally don't understand what the Treasurer was thinking. Did he not read the numbers? Or did he read them, realize how bad it looked, and decide to blame Aussies anyway? This is where things really blew up. A couple of days later, RBA Governor Michelle Bullock appeared before a parliamentary committee. She was asked directly whether government spending contributes to inflation and interest rate decisions. Chalmers must have heard that and must have been panicking. She made it abundantly clear that government spending absolutely led to inflation being out of control, especially when it comes through rebates, transfers, and programs that put cash straight into people's hands. In other words, she publicly contradicted the idea that households alone are to blame. And that moment mattered because it exposed the lie at the heart of the Treasurer's argument. So now you've got the Treasurer blaming households, the RBA explaining the maths, and the government suddenly under a microscope. And instead of taking responsibility, what actually happened next? They pivot. Suddenly the conversation shifts to tax reform. Suddenly everything is on the table. Capital gains, negative gearing, fuel excise, taxes on alcohol, taxes on tobacco, taxes on electricity, essentials. If they could tax the air you breathe, they probably would. Because when you blow out spending and the bill comes due, you have two options: cut spending or raise revenue. And cutting spending is politically painful. So they're going to go after the revenue. Okay, so let's zoom out because this is where everything connects. The big four banks care about risk, and what they've been watching over the last week is a government blaming households, a central bank quietly pushing back, inflation staying higher for longer, and no clear plan to fix the underlying problem. So they did what banks do. CBA, Westpac, and NAB all changed their forecasts. Only a month ago, most banks thought February would be the last hike. Now the majority expect another 25 basis point hike in May, taking the cash rate up to around 4.1%. That is a massive flip in a very short space of time. Markets followed. Odds of a May hike jumped fast, and all four banks passed the February hike straight onto borrowers without hesitation. That tells you something incredibly important. The banks do not believe this is getting fixed quickly. They see a long grind ahead, not a quick reset. Think of it this way: the RBA doesn't want to be blamed for taking the rates down too quick. The government doesn't want to be blamed for all of their spending. So now they are actually fighting amongst each other. And here's what really worries me here. All of this internal chaos, this misalignment, is happening while the global environment is already unstable. Geopolitical tensions are rising, trade relationships are shifting, big economies are repositioning. Australia should be in a strong, stable position right now. We should be tightening the ship, building buffers and preparing for external shocks. Instead, we are internally unstable. We've got inflation still too high, rates rising again, households under pressure, a government scrambling for revenue, and policy uncertainty everywhere you look. That is not a good setup for what comes next. Okay, so let's wrap all of this up. Rates are now at 3.85%. The banks passed the hike straight on, and the RBA governor has made it clear that government spending does in fact play a role in keeping demand high. At the same time, 3 of the big 4 banks now think another hike in May is very possible, taking rates to around 4.1%, because inflation is still sitting well above target and isn't expected to come down quickly. The real issue here is trust. Aussies are being told different stories while their bills keep rising and their breathing room keeps shrinking. So I do want to hear from you. Do you think we're headed for another rate hike this year? Or do you think May is where the RBA finally pauses? And do you think Aussies are being told the full truth about what's driving all of this chaos? Or are we just being managed until the next budget? Drop your view in the comments. I read them. And if you want straight, no spin breakdowns of what's happening in property and the economy, hit subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss one of my daily updates. I'll see you at the next one.